The worst day of my professional life began with applause. Not the respectful kind. The uncomfortable kind people give when they don't know what else to do. I was standing in the conference room of Silverline Marketing, holding a cardboard box that contained the remains of 21 years of my life. 21 years. That's how long I had worked there. Long enough to watch the company grow from a modest office with barely 15 employees into a respected marketing firm with international clients. And now I was being escorted out. My supervisor cleared his throat nervously. "Alicia," he said, avoiding my eyes, "the company is restructuring." Restructuring. A polite word that means you're no longer needed. Around the table, my coworkers shifted awkwardly in their chairs. Some looked sympathetic. Some looked relieved that it wasn't them. But one person laughed. My sister. Varela Marquez. She leaned back in her chair, arms folded, watching the scene unfold like it was some kind of office entertainment. "Well," she said casually, "I guess loyalty doesn't always pay off." A few nervous chuckles followed. My face burned, but I didn't respond. Because something inside me had already made a decision. If this was the day my old life ended, then the next chapter would be very different. But before we continue, if stories about revenge, family drama, and unexpected justice resonate with you, like the video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let me tell you who I really am. My name is Alicia Marquez. I'm 42 years old. And until that morning, I had spent 21 years building Silverline Marketing. Not working there. Building it. I joined the company when I was barely out of university. Back then the office had old furniture, outdated computers, and only a handful of clients. But we had ambition. Over the years, I helped design campaigns that brought in some of our biggest contracts. Retail brands. Hospital networks. National advertising partnerships. Many of the company's biggest successes carried pieces of my work inside them. But companies change. Leadership changes. And loyalty rarely survives ambition. 3 years earlier, the company's founder retired. The board brought in new executives. Young. Aggressive. Focused on rapid expansion. That was also the year my sister Varela joined the company. And that was when everything began to change. Varela and I were only 4 years apart. But growing up, we might as well have lived in different worlds. I was the quiet one. The planner. The person who believed hard work would eventually speak for itself. Varela was different. She was fearless. Confident. The kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately behave like she owned it. People noticed her instantly. Teachers. Friends. Employers. And Varela loved attention. When she joined Silverline Marketing, I genuinely hoped working together would bring us closer. Instead, it created something else. Competition. At first it was subtle. Different ideas during meetings. Different strategies for client campaigns. But over time something darker began to grow. Varela didn't just want to succeed. She wanted to prove she was better than me. And the day I was fired, she believed she finally had. Walking out of the Silverline building felt unreal. The lobby where I had walked through thousands of times suddenly felt unfamiliar. Cold. Temporary. My security badge stopped working the moment I reached the exit gate. A short electronic beep. 21 years ended by a single sound. Outside, the afternoon sun felt strangely bright. I stood there holding the cardboard box. Inside were small reminders of an entire career. An old award plaque. A coffee mug from my first client. Several notebooks filled with marketing ideas. 2 decades of work reduced to a few personal items. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Varela. Don't take it personal. Business is business. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I laughed quietly. Because for the first time in 21 years, I finally had something I never had before. Freedom. And sometimes, freedom is the beginning of the most dangerous comeback. For the first time in 21 years, my mornings were quiet. No alarms for early meetings. No urgent client emails waiting before sunrise. Just silence. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. After decades of constant work, I didn't know what to do with the empty hours. But slowly, something unexpected began to happen. Ideas started returning. Not the safe marketing strategies Silverline had been using recently. Better ones. For years I had watched the industry changing, digital platforms, automation, AI-driven analytics. But Silverline's new executives had dismissed many of those ideas. Too risky, they said. Now those ideas were mine again. One evening, while reviewing old campaign data on my laptop, a thought struck me. Silverline wasn't struggling because the market had changed. It was struggling because the leadership had stopped innovating. They were repeating the same strategies that had worked 10 years ago. And suddenly, I realized something important. For 21 years, I had been helping someone else build a company. Maybe it was finally time to build my own. 3 months later, my new company existed. Not in a glamorous office. Not in a glass skyscraper. Just a small rented workspace above a quiet cafe. 2 desks. 3 computers. And 1 whiteboard covered in ideas. I named the company Novarin Strategy Group. It sounded bold. Ambitious. Exactly the kind of company Silverline used to be. At first it was just me. But slowly, opportunities appeared. A small retail brand needed help with digital marketing. A health startup wanted a campaign strategy. 1 client became 2. 2 became 5. The work wasn't easy. But something felt different. For the first time in years. Every decision was mine. 6 months after leaving Silverline, something strange happened. One of my former colleagues called me late at night. "Have you heard what's happening over here?" he asked. "No," I said. "Silverline is losing clients." That surprised me. For decades Silverline had been one of the most stable marketing firms in the region. "What happened?" I asked. He sighed. "Bad leadership decisions. New strategies. Failed campaigns. Major clients leaving." Then he said something else. "Your sister is still acting like everything is fine." That didn't surprise me at all. Varela had always believed confidence could solve every problem. But confidence doesn't fix bad strategy. And slowly, Silverline's problems were getting worse. 9 months after I was fired, I attended a business conference in another city. I wasn't expecting anything dramatic. Just networking. Learning. Maybe meeting potential clients. But during one panel discussion, I overheard something interesting. 2 investors were talking quietly behind me. Silverline stock has been dropping for months. Board members are worried. Someone could buy a controlling share if this continues. My attention sharpened immediately. Silverline had once been my entire career. Now it was becoming something else. An opportunity. Later that night, I reviewed the company's financial reports. The numbers confirmed what I suspected. Silverline was vulnerable. For the first time in its history, the company could actually be bought. And suddenly, a very interesting idea appeared in my mind. One that involved patience, strategy, and exactly 1 year. After the conference, I spent 3 nights studying Silverline's financial reports. Numbers tell stories. And Silverline's numbers were telling a very dangerous one. Revenue had dropped nearly 15% in less than a year. Several longtime clients had quietly moved their contracts to other agencies. And most importantly, the company's stock price had been slowly falling. For investors, that kind of weakness is an invitation. For someone patient enough, it was an opportunity. I contacted an old acquaintance from the conference, a venture consultant named Orvelin Thorne. We met in a quiet restaurant 2 days later. I'm not looking to buy the company immediately, I told him. I want to accumulate shares quietly. He raised an eyebrow. You used to work there, didn't you? 21 years. He smiled slightly. Then this must be personal. I didn't answer. Because sometimes the best strategy is silence. But that meeting marked the first real step of my plan. Within 2 weeks, the first shares of Silverline Marketing were quietly purchased. And no one inside the company noticed. 3 months later, I heard the news. Varela had been promoted. Executive Director of Strategy. Silverline announced the promotion proudly across industry news sites. Photos of her appeared in press releases, smiling confidently in front of the company logo. Her interviews were full of bold promises. Silverline is entering a new era, she told reporters. We're expanding aggressively. But behind the headlines, the reality looked different. Silverline was still losing clients. Campaign performance was declining. And leadership decisions were becoming riskier. Meanwhile, every month, more shares quietly moved into the hands of the same investment group. My investment group. Slowly. Carefully. Patiently. The board of directors believed outside investors were simply taking advantage of the company's falling price. They had no idea who was behind it. But the more Silverline struggled, the easier my next move became. Exactly 1 year after the day I carried my cardboard box out of Silverline's office, the board scheduled an emergency meeting. The company's stock had dropped another 20%. Several directors were worried about hostile investors gaining influence. One board member asked the obvious question. Who owns the largest block of new shares? The finance department presented the answer. A private investment firm. Valeri's Capital Group. The board relaxed slightly. Investment firms buying shares wasn't unusual. But what they didn't know was this. Valeri's Capital had only one controlling partner. Me. 2 weeks later, Silverline announced a major shareholders meeting. Investors would attend. Board members would present recovery plans. And the company would reveal its largest new stakeholder. Inside the office, employees were nervous. Rumors spread through the departments. No one knew what was coming. Except me. On the morning of the meeting, I stood in front of the same office building I had walked out of 1 year earlier. The glass doors looked exactly the same. But everything had changed. Because this time, I wasn't walking in as an employee. I was walking in as the owner. The Silverline boardroom looked exactly the same as the last time I had been there. Long polished table. Glass walls overlooking the city. 12 leather chairs surrounding the place where the most important decisions were made. Exactly 1 year earlier, I had been escorted out of that building carrying a cardboard box. Now I walked back in through the same doors. But this time, no one tried to stop me. Investors were already seated around the table when I arrived. Several board members looked confused. One of them leaned toward another director and whispered something. They clearly didn't recognize me. That wasn't surprising. For 21 years, I had worked behind the scenes. Not in headlines. Not in press releases. Across the room, my sister Varela stood confidently near the presentation screen. She was explaining her new recovery strategy to the board. Our expansion plan will stabilize Silverline within the next fiscal year, she said. Her voice carried the same confidence I remembered from the day she laughed when I was fired. Then the chairman raised his hand. Before we continue, he said, we should introduce the company's newest controlling shareholder. Varela smiled politely. Then she turned around and saw me. For a moment, Varela didn't react. Her expression remained calm. Professional. The same expression she used during presentations with important clients. But then recognition slowly appeared in her eyes. Alicia, she said quietly. The boardroom turned toward me. I walked forward slowly. Yes, I replied. The chairman stood up. Allow me to introduce Ms. Alicia Marquez, he said. He gestured toward me. The majority shareholder of Valeri's Capital Group, which now holds the largest controlling interest in Silverline marketing. The room erupted in quiet murmurs. Varela looked stunned. You, she said, struggling to process the words. You bought the company? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I placed a folder of documents on the table. The chairman opened it. He nodded. It's official, he said. Silverline Marketing now belongs to Valeri's Capital. Then he looked at me. And Ms. Marquez is the principal owner. The silence in the boardroom felt familiar. 1 year earlier, I had stood in another room inside this building while people watched me lose everything. Now those same kinds of eyes were watching again. But this time the situation was very different. Varela stared at me in disbelief. This isn't possible, she said. I met her gaze calmly. It took 12 months, I said. 12 months of buying shares while the company's value dropped. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They were beginning to understand what had happened. For a year, someone had been quietly accumulating control of the company. And none of them had realized who it was. Varela shook her head slowly. You planned this? I thought for a moment before answering. No, I said. You planned it. Her confusion deepened. You laughed the day I was fired, I continued. And you reminded me of something important. The room waited. That I had spent 20-1 years building a company that didn't belong to me. The chairman cleared his throat. Well, he said carefully, since ownership has changed, we should discuss leadership. Every board member turned toward me. Varela's face had lost its confidence. For the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. What happens now? She asked. I looked around the room slowly. 21 years of memories lived inside these walls. Late nights. Creative breakthroughs. Campaign victories. And the day everything ended. Or so I thought. Finally I answered. Silverline needs new leadership, I said calmly. Several board members nodded immediately. Varela remained silent. Then she asked the question she was most afraid to ask. You're not going to fire me, are you? I paused. Because this was the moment everything had been building toward. The moment where the story could end in revenge. Or something else entirely. The boardroom waited for my answer. Varela sat frozen in her chair, the confidence that once defined her completely gone. 1 year earlier she had laughed while I carried a cardboard box out of this building. Now the entire company belonged to me. The irony was impossible to ignore. You're not going to fire me, are you? She asked quietly. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I leaned back slightly in the chair at the head of the table. For a moment, I considered the question carefully. Revenge would have been easy. 1 signature. 1 sentence. Security escorting her out exactly the way I had been escorted out a year ago. But that wasn't why I bought the company. I'm not interested in revenge, I said calmly. The board members exchanged surprised looks. Varela stared at me, unsure what that meant. But Silverline does need leadership that understands the business it built, I continued. 21 years of experience had taught me something simple. Companies don't fail because of markets. They fail because of decisions. And the next decision would define the company's future. The chairman adjusted his glasses. Ms. Marquez, he said carefully, do you intend to take an executive role? I nodded. Yes. Then I looked around the boardroom. For the first time in 21 years, I wasn't speaking as an employee. I was speaking as the owner. Silverline used to succeed because it was innovative, I said. We built strategies other agencies were afraid to try. Several of the older board members nodded. They remembered those years. But somewhere along the way, I continued, this company stopped taking smart risks. Instead it chased short-term growth. Flashy campaigns. Expensive expansions. The exact strategies that had weakened the company. Varela looked down at the table. Because she knew exactly what I meant. Silverline isn't broken, I finished. It just forgot what made it successful. And now. It was time to remind everyone. Within minutes, the board voted. The decision passed almost unanimously. I was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Silverline Marketing. The same company that had fired me 1 year earlier. As the meeting ended, the directors slowly gathered their documents. The tension in the room had softened. But Varela remained seated. She looked at me cautiously. I really thought you were finished after that day, she said quietly. I nodded. So did I. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question that had clearly been sitting in her mind all morning. Why didn't you tell anyone you were buying the company? I smiled slightly. Because strategy works best when your competitors underestimate you. 6 months after the takeover, Silverline began recovering. Old clients returned. New campaigns succeeded. And the company slowly rebuilt the reputation it once had. One evening I stood in my office overlooking the same city skyline I had stared at for 21 years. Only now the view felt different. Not because the city had changed. But because I had. My phone buzzed with a message from one of the new interns. Your story is inspiring to a lot of us. I smiled quietly. Because the truth was simpler than that. Success wasn't about revenge. It was about patience. About learning from failure. And about remembering something most people forget. Sometimes the worst day of your life is simply the first chapter of a much better story.